to acknowledge Women Speak Tasmania for their sterling and you know, standing up to quite virulent pushback from the trans lobby, but they keep on keeping on, and that's what we all need to do. So today I'm going to talk directly to the politicians, the lawmakers, health policy personnel, educators, doctors, and all those who are perpetuating atrocities against a vulnerable generation of children and adolescents. I'm going to ask the question, why? How can seemingly intelligent, educated people engage in such malpractice and malfeasance on such a massive scale? Before I attempt to formulate this, I want to show you some facts and figures about the shifting sands of gender ideology. In 2024, the sex ratio for the entire world population, including all ages, is approximately 101 to 106 males to 100 females. This has been so since data were first collected and reported in the 17th century by John Gaunt, and his first published work was in 1662. Now have a look at the self-reported gender ideology, identity, non-cisgender National College Health Assessment that was conducted in the USA. There are 2.6 times more trans males than females. There has been a 7.25-fold increase in the number of girls identifying as male since 2015, and a 4.1-fold increase in the number of boys identifying as female. If social factors are not at play, how do we explain the greater absolute numbers of girls identifying as transgender? If we conflate trans identification with gender non-conforming, which happens in a great deal of gender-supported research, we obtain a 10 times inflation in the numbers of young people. This is incredibly deceptive reporting. Trans and gender non-conforming are not the same. Many gender non-conforming young people grow to be well-developed, normal heterosexual people, and a significant proportion of them resolve their gender non-conformance into a gay identity. This was before the advent of the transgender. Even more alarming, to show you how numbers are grossly manipulated, in 2015, the census question changed from "what is your gender" to "do you identify as transgender?" As a result, as can be seen from the graph, there was an 8-fold increase in the numbers identifying as trans, simply by changing the question on the census to make it explicit about trans identity. This is what happens to data and evidence when the researchers ask leading questions, yet we are repeatedly asked to believe that gender identity is an immutable internal sense without any influence from the social world. The last slide shows figures of those identifying as non-binary, which I believe is a synonym for gender confusion, compared with those identifying in the opposite binary as trans male or trans female. So non-binary young people have been confused by the rhetoric and by the reprehensible sex education programs being conducted in all our schools in this country, beginning in kindergarten. And just as one very quick example, I saw a 10-year-old a couple of weeks ago, and her parents were concerned about her statements about gender. And I asked her what gender she was, and she said, "I don't know." There are too many to choose from. We have got to the point where we can no longer even define what a woman is.
What is a woman?
So that's where we're up to in our thinking about biological sex and what is a woman. Charles Mackay in 1841 wrote a book on social contagion long before the advent of the digital age. He called them moral epidemics. Popular delusions, he said, began so early and spread so widely and have lasted so long, they may be considered a miscellany of delusions, a chapter only in the great and awful book of human folly. In his second edition in 1852, he said, "Men think in herds. They go mad in herds while they only recover their senses slowly and one by one." Social contagion is embedded as a characteristic of human groups. Canny and cunning political, military and social leaders have used the natural propensity of members of a group to infect each other in order to change the entire social structure of a community, state or nation. What is social contagion and how does it work? Social network analysis, the method applied to study contagions of all kinds, was first developed and used in public health as a way of determining the spread of diseases like influenza, HIV, AIDS, and COVID that resulted in pandemics. It was subsequently applied to the challenges of introducing changes and innovations in health systems. Its applications have since expanded with the advent of computers, the internet, mobile and smartphones, and social media. Members of a network play different roles in the dissemination of innovations. A small number will adopt early. Some of these will become opinion leaders who are central to the network, who contaminate their peers, who in turn will influence the others at different levels of the network. The next factor is conformity. Conformity is usually enforced through surveillance and punishment. While it may seem a glib comparison, the rise of the Third Reich in Germany in the 1920s and 30s is a compelling example of the utilisation of networks of social influence that created an almost unanimous subscription of the German people to the Nazi ideology that cemented the new principles of Nazism into every social institution: economics, trade, media, culture, law and education, to eliminate all forms of opposition, both in thought and deed, to the new regime. Like the Nazi Party and its ideologists, gender ideologists have created a new vocabulary to capture their warped and delusional view of sex and gender. Threat of sanctions, including fear of job loss and public vilification, were and are used by this regime to silence dissent. I fear that we have fallen into a bizarre form of Stockholm syndrome, where we captives now sympathise and abet our captors, including sacrificing our children. Conformity is rewarded, and we can see here the group is valorised. We're not individuals, we're part of a group, and it's rewarded by slogans and banners and collective belonging. Educational indoctrination. Hitler knew the value of capturing his acolytes early through education and indoctrination. Parents had no choice about enrolling their children in Nazi schools where they graduated into Nazi youth. Young innocents were turned into young Nazis. Our trans young people wear the scars of cross-sex hormones and sex reassignment surgery to display their club membership in the same way as the Hitler Youth did last century. These methods were spectacularly successful. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, membership of the Hitler Youth reached 2.3 million members. By 1940, there were 8 million members of the Hitler Jugend, the Hitler Youth. These methods have been transferred into the recruitment of young people into transgender ideology. In Nazi Germany, the use of shaming and scapegoating created in-groups and out-groups. In this image, we see two young boys with their head bowed over there in the corner with the Star of David, and they are now the out-group in the classroom. They're the Jewish children. And the teacher is rewarding and paying attention to all the Aryan children in the classroom. Here we see a very similar thing happening, the indoctrination of children into gender ideology. Vladimir Lenin said, "Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted." The trans ideologists have taken that very much to heart. They're indoctrinating our preschoolers and our kindergarten children. Our schools are telling children about gender ideology, indoctrinating them beginning in kindergarten. Children are told that men can have vaginas and girls can have penises. This can be very, very confusing and destabilising for young children. The next tactic used by Nazi Germany and the trans ideologists is cultural appropriation. Nazi Germany was a master of cultural appropriation. For example, the Boy Scouts were banned in the Third Reich, but the Hitler Youth Organisation used the same format and activities of the Boy Scouts movement to advance their ideology. Gender ideology has appropriated many culturally embedded practices into its teaching. For example, this book, using the title, "'Twas the Night Before," and you're all at this instant sub-vocalising the word Christmas. But no, it's the night before Pride. And its symbol, the rainbow flag, and it's been inserted and culturally appropriated from the religious imagination of Christian societies, and by association rendering its precepts as valid as a dominant religious culture. Indeed, it is an old trick, one at which the Christian church itself was very adept by appropriating pagan rituals into Christian practices. Now, groupthink is probably the most virulent and dangerous social phenomenon that we encounter. Groupthink is an extreme form of conformity in which people are prepared to keep the peace at all costs. It occurs in homogeneous groups when a powerful and charismatic leader is insistent on a preferred course of action, when the group is under severe stress, where significant moral dilemmas are part of the decision matrix, and where objective outside experts are not called upon. The consequences of groupthink include the illusion of invulnerability, collective rationalisation, stereotyping of outgroups, self-censorship, and belief in the inherent morality of the group. Group thinkers do poor information search. They're not interested in evidence. They do an incomplete survey of alternatives. fail to appraise the risks of the preferred solution, they use selective information processing, and they conflate ethics and expedience. Political correctness and wokeness in which we are steeped are a form of social groupthink. Is gender ideology a cult that has infected our institutions? A cult is a form of worship or adherence to specific rites and ceremonies in which excessive devotion is paid to a particular person or belief system. It requires unswerving loyalty to the ideology, sets up an us and them mentality that creates in-groups and out-groups, recruitment of vulnerable young people whom cult leaders isolate from family and other social networks, subject them to long periods of indoctrination, and reward them for compliance with sacrifices like cross-sex hormones and double mastectomies. Individuality and independence are forbidden, and violations of those wishing to retain their own mind are often severely punished, which is the treatment meted out to desisters, regretters, and detransitioners. Cults are a little like human psyches. They divide the world into good and evil. Cults also evince other psychopathology, including primitive narcissism and grandiosity. Cult members perceive themselves above or outside social norms, laws, or any sanctions imposed from without. I would say the transgender ideologists have formed a cult. Individuals start cults, and individuals must cause their disintegration. The same forces that I have described here affect individuals and organisations in similar ways. Institutions, like individuals, are subject to social contagion, groupthink, and the problems of complicity, collaboration, cowardice, and the abandonment of critical thinking. Transgenderism is primarily a socio-cultural and political phenomenon, not a psychological or medical phenomenon that has been fuelled by social contagion and groupthink social processes. You will observe all the features described above in the conduct of transgender advocacy individuals and institutions alike. What is the sinister agenda underneath ideological capture of institutions? People want to be part of an in-group. They want rewards for compliance, sanctions for dissent. They're self-interested. There are prospects for promotion, praise, and making lots of money. Big pharma, surgeons, and other medical specialists like paediatricians, endocrinologists, and now GPs have all jumped on the trans bandwagon to increase their markets. Then we have the silent majority. Evil triumphs when so-called good people do nothing. And history. Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. The sociology of group behaviour, we must understand, is that people behave differently in groups compared with how they behave as individuals. People say to me, "You're so brave for speaking out. I would like to speak out too, but no." I want to add one more element that cements institutional capture, and that's what I call moral narcissism, the intoxication of moral authority and superiority. Moral narcissism is active when one prioritises one's own moral self-image over the social or actual consequences of one's actions. So to put it very simply, it is better to appear good than to do good. Moral narcissists seek attention for perceived rather than actual righteousness. The politicians and trans activists in this country suffer from moral narcissism. They have abandoned science and logic because they do not advance their own moral authority for no other reason. And I want to complete my presentation with this.
I don't understand the term biological men.
Right. This might be a short tranche of questions then.
Discrimination Commissioner Anna Cody, who doesn't know what sex is. Thank you very much.